I wanted to let you all know that we are going to get started with a bang this morning. We have 4 members of Congress speaking to us here today at the Secular Coalition for America. When I got involved in the Secular Coalition for America back in 2006, that would have been completely unthinkable. It would have been completely unthinkable. And so I'm really, really proud of where this organization has come in its a little over 10-year history now. And the first person that we want to welcome here this morning is Representative Rush Holt. He's a longtime friend of the secular community, and he's a huge advocate for science on Capitol Hill. Representative Rush Holt from the 12th District of New Jersey, prior to being elected to Congress, was a 5-time Jeopardy champion. And he won a round against the IBM supercomputer. And so that's pretty cool. He also was a research physicist, and that's a background that allowed his constituents to put on bumper stickers, "My congressman is a rocket scientist." I think a lot more of us would like to be able to say that about our congressmen and women from our districts. Congressman Holt has worked tirelessly to promote science and scientific research. He's pushed for more money, securing $22 billion in research funding in the stimulus bill, and grants for students who prepare to teach math, science, or foreign languages. Representative Holt has twice sponsored congressional resolutions to recognize February 12th as National Darwin Day. And we could go on and on about all of the awesome things about Representative Holt, but suffice it to say, he's going to be sorely missed when he retires at the end of his 8th term, and it is our great honor to welcome this morning New Jersey Congressman Rush Holt.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the nice introduction. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning, and I wish you much success in your conference, because you are champions not just of the First Amendment, but you are really champions of America and the American tradition, and we need you. It's coincidental but not insignificant that Darwin's birthday is also Abraham Lincoln's birthday. It was actually the very same day. So when we champion the kind of creative, progressive thinking of Darwin, we are also, I think, honoring the person and the idea expressed in the words that we are a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all are equal. It is, the founders set up a most ingenious system, and it was ingenious at many levels. These guys were truly geniuses. They had seen the problems around the world created by sectarian strife and bloodshed, and they wanted to protect against that. And many people describe the First Amendment, providing freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, as a guard against this kind of sectarian factionalism that turned deadly and bloody. But it was really much more than that. In this First Amendment, when they were providing for freedom of religion, they were also quite explicitly talking about freedom from religion. That in fact, you can't preserve one without preserving the other. So, many of you who are seeking freedom from religion have to keep in mind that the other side of the coin must be there. One can't really exist without the other. And so they were talking about a freedom from doctrine, a freedom from ideology, a freedom from dogma. And I realize there are nuances in the meanings of those three words, but let me kind of group them together to make the point that they were trying to protect us, themselves at the time, but succeeding generations, because there's no question they were setting up a government for the long term. You know, just the symbolism of building the Capitol here a decade or so later, the grandest building the country had ever seen. In a country that most of the rest of the world didn't believe would be around for very long. This was a real, leap of faith, if I may say. That they really believed that they were putting in something for the ages. In fact, if you look at the dollar bill, there's this Latin phrase that is roughly translated. Let's see if I have a dollar with me. On the back side, where there's all this kind of strange symbol, symbolism of things that maybe we aren't necessarily proud of. There is a phrase called Novus Ordo Seclorum, which means a new order for the ages. That's what they were talking about. And protecting us and succeeding generations from imposed doctrine, ideology, dogma, they were not just being defensive. They weren't just trying to protect us from sectarian strife. They were trying to really protect and enshrine what came to be known as the American way of thinking. And the American way of thinking, I say, is thinking like a scientist. It is a very pragmatic, very evidence-based way of approaching things. Every farmer, every shopkeeper, every factory worker, every factory owner, for 2 centuries, has been part of this thread of American thinking where we are grounded in evidence and looking for measurable progress. And that's what they were talking about when they added the First Amendment. It took a year or two for them to get around to doing it, because at first they thought it was so obvious they didn't need to write it down. But thank goodness they did, because it does provide us a legal grounding for protecting this way of thinking, because sometimes we have to go to court to protect these protections. And now I'm talking about public policy here, of course. That's what our Constitution is about. It's not about individuals. It is about forming a union in order to promote the general welfare. And so I won't say anything more about religion in personal life or personal spiritualism, except that it must be protected. But what I wanted to talk about is these protections in the public sphere. The scientific way of thinking, well, I often, when I meet with students, I ask them to say, well, what do we mean by science? I've come up with what is really a quite simple definition that youngsters can understand, that I think is as good as any definition any Nobel Prize winning scientist can come up with, which is, it's a way of asking questions so that they can be answered empirically. Now, when I'm talking with little kids, I sometimes don't use the word empirical, and verifiably, and I sometimes don't use the word verifiable. But what I mean is asking questions so they can be answered in ways based on evidence and expressed so that others can check your work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are the two key ingredients of thinking like a scientist. And our founders did. In fact, many of them were explicitly scientists. Now, the word scientist was not in common usage in English at that time. They would talk about natural philosophy and things like that. But clearly, you know, John Adams studied astronomy in addition to law at Harvard. Thomas Paine conducted experiments. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, need I say more. These were people who understood that they were engaged in a practical undertaking. And if you look at the Federalist Papers, these essays that were circulated widely to win acceptance of the Constitution, the word, and I got this from a book by Tim Ferriss, which is interesting reading, called The Spirit of Liberty. The word experiment appeared dozens of times in the Federalist Papers, far more than the word democracy. So in a sense, they were not so much promoting an ideology as they were promoting a way of thinking based on experiment. In other words, open-mindedness, so that it is the practical outcome of observation and experiment that gives us the progress, rather than a presumed ideology. This has slipped a little bit, I would say, in recent decades. It is enormously powerful, and I think was pretty well understood for years and years, centuries, in this country, but not so well understood right now. And that's where you come in. That's why you're so important. It's not to bash religiosity. It's not to advance atheism. It is, I think, your role is to advance the American way of thinking, which is open-minded. If we are going to have a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all are equal, you have to have this, I think, open-minded approach. And I think it was probably best said by Judge Learned Hand, a wonderful essay in a wonderful collection of essays called The Spirit of Liberty. Federal Judge Learned Hand sat on the bench in the middle of the 20th century in New York, was one of the most eloquent, I think, defenders of the American way. And in the middle of the Second World War, which was a time, of course, of jingoism and rampant patriotism, he spoke to some new citizens in Central Park, some large gathering of some thousands of newly sworn-in Americans, and delivered a short speech called The Spirit of Liberty, in which the key sentence was, "The spirit of liberty is that spirit that is not too certain it is right." That, I think, is what you need to defend, so that we can recapture this American way of thinking that is not a defensive way of thinking. Again, I want to emphasize my initial remarks. This these freedoms outlined in the First Amendment are not there just to protect us from factionalism and bloodshed and strife, but really to propel us toward more general welfare through progressive thinking. And I don't mean progressive in the modern political sense. I mean that we can improve people's lives year by year if we engage in this kind of open-minded, non-ideological thinking. Thanks. And I think Senator Whitehouse is on his way.
Yeah, he is.
He's here. Fine, okay.
One question and then we'll
Yes,
go.
okay.
Referring to your fellow people from in Congress, those that promote ideas that are contrary to science, have you found either they don't understand science, they really believe what they're saying, or they promote the ideas for the political value of it?
I mean, there are all kinds. Among the 435 members of Congress, there are 435 strong personalities, different backgrounds. They're not all lawyers, and really quite different motivations. So you'll find among them cynics. You'll find them among them misguided true believers, and you'll find among them generally people who share the hopes, fears, and misapprehensions of the American public.
Thank you so much.
Bravo.